piece of the pie also?
Oh yeah, she's involved.
He's involved.
She's involved. She's involved. Pelosi's involved. Schuman's involved.
So, welcome, Lech Lecha,
How long is it?
45 minutes. Lech Lecha is page 54 in the Art Scroll book. And this was read yesterday. It's a real fundamental parsha because there's lots of foundational concepts. So it begins, the Torah portion begins, and God said to Abraham, Lech Lecha, leave Artzecha, your land, Moiladetcha, your birthplace, Beis Avicha, your father's house, El Haaretz Asher Areka, to the land that I will show you. The next verse in the Torah, or a couple of verses later, it says Abraham was 75 years old when God told him that. Nowhere is it recorded that God spoke to Abraham before he was 75 years old. And only when he was 75 years old, that was the first interaction that he had with God. And it's explained in Hasidic thinking is that the reason for him not having a dialogue with God, even though he was holy and pure and he was the patriarch before 75, is because he believed in God due to his own logic. As the Midrash tells us, that when he was a young child, he looked up and saw the sun, and he goes, the sun is God. Then when the sun set and the moon came and the stars came with it, he goes, it defeated the sun. The moon must be God, and look at the servants the moon has, twinkling little stars, right? Then the clouds came and covered the moon. So he goes, well, that's odd. The moon is gone, right? But I still see these. Maybe there was a coup, right? Maybe the moon did some type of Russian collusion. Then the morning happened. The sun rose. So then he looks at the ocean, and then he looks at this, looks at that, and finally he came to the conclusion that there must be a God. But it was all logic. The reason why it starts here is because this is the penultimate test that one can give. Leave, Lech Lecha. So the Torah tells us, Lech Lecha, leave, me'artzecha, from your, the word eretz comes from the word will. Leave your eretz, leave your will, leave where you want to be. Leave where you want to be. Leave your environment. So there's a place where you want to be. You know, people are very happy being with family and his mother, his father, his uncles, his cousins. You know, he had a big and they lived there. They lived in Haran. They lived in Haran, which is, I think, present day Iraq. They lived there for many, many years. The Avram's father was a well-known merchant of idol worships. He was very wealthy. Avram had a decent life, even though he wasn't involved in the family business, but he still, he benefited from the family business. And God said, leave Maladatcha, leave your environment. He had a lot of friends. He had a Beis Avicha from the education, whatever your parents inculcated you. Ela Aretz, to the land, Ashareka, so vague, the land that I will show you. It wasn't there's nothing logical about this. And Avram did. That because it was illogical, what God asked him to do. I remember up until now, it was all based on, he did things for God, but based on his logic. Now finally comes a test that you got to do something, even if it doesn't make sense. You're going to do something, even if it's irrational to you, but you're doing it because of God. And go to the land that I will show you, and I will bless you, and I'll make you into a great nation, etc. So the reason why it's so fundamental is, first and foremost, it happens to all of us. God tells our soul, Lech Lecha, leave. I don't want you hanging around my throne. I want you to go to the world. Where you are right now, godliness is apparent. Where you are right now, you're basking in the glory of Hashem's presence. Where you are right now, you are nurtured spiritually every single day. And I want you to go to the place, Asher Reka, but I'll tell you, when you go down to this world, godliness is not apparent, right? It's called olam. This world is called olam. Olam comes from the word helam, concealment. Rather, what is it? Nature, teva, ha-teva, the nature has the numerical value of God, Elohim. But what the other word for nature, the other meaning of nature, is tova, sunken. It's sunk. You can't see it because it's sunk, because it's tova bayam. It is sunk in the sea. So God says, soul, my dear soul, leave me. I don't want to leave you. Leave me, right? And go to the land that I will show you, where godliness is not apparent, and you're going to have to. Anything you learned up here is going to be somewhat. It's going to be hidden, and it's going to be you're going to have to work to get to where you were, and that's illogical. That's illogical. I think furthermore that once you're here, you have to do things that are illogical again, right? You have a new job, and you tell your boss, I'm sorry, for 7 days in the month of Tishrei, I can't make it because I got 2 days Rosh Hashanah, I got Yom Kippur, right? And the boss goes, well, I can't come. And Fridays, once the clock changes, I'm gonna have to leave early, right? That makes your life hard, right? And when after the war, when the Jews came here, we know how hard it was. They lost their job every Saturday, and who fired them? The Jewish bosses, who weren't into this, felt that religion was opium for the masses. So, and logic will tell you, keep your job. You need money. You need. Torah tells you you can't. Right. So it's really, really a test of faith. By the way, in Genesis, when it says that God blessed the seventh day, it says, so the commentaries explain, what did he bless it with? What does it mean that he blessed it? So the commentaries explain that he blessed it, that whatever money Shabbos costs you, either by loss of income or by loss of job or spending on the Shabbat meal, inviting guests, that's not part of your annual salary that God promised you on Rosh Hashanah. That's what it means, that God blessed the seventh day, that it's not part and parcel. It's, by the way, and this is Jewish law. This is quoted, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, usually does not talk about these type of ethereal things, right? But it does here. It says, whatever money you spend on Shabbat, it's just not. God guarantees you're going to make 200 grand this year. But you spend 30 grand on Shabbat throughout the, you have a ton of guests. That 30 grand is not part of the 200 grand equation. May we all be able to make 200 grand a year, and then some. So Lecha, that's why it's so fundamental. Is you got to go out from your own preconceived notions. Everybody, we have to leave our training that we're taught that the godliness is just there's such a disconnect that you cannot get close to God, or whatever the training is, or there is no God, right? You know about the story about the kid that comes home from college, and his father's an atheist, and he tells his father, Dad, I learned that there is no God. And he goes, yeah, I've been telling you that all along. I also learned that we come from monkeys. Because that's absolutely ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. So he tells his mother, right? Mom, do you believe we come from monkeys? And Mom said, yeah, I do believe we come from monkeys. So his father said, your mother's side comes from monkeys, right? But and he says, I will go to the land that I will show you. And it's interesting thing. God didn't tell him the land. That was another part of the test, right? Just travel. Right? That was another part of the test. But it also teaches us that where you're going is sometimes irrelevant, right? compared to the journey to get there. Right? Land, I'll show you. Right? We know from the time Abraham left his father's house until he got to Israel, he had trials and tribulations and victories and losses, etc. It's the journey. So it's not so much the destination, it's how one handles the journey. So this is why it's so fundamental. Then the Torah tells us, and I will bless you, and I'll make you into a big nation, and whoever blesses you shall be blessed. Umakalelcha, whoever curses you, or should be cursed. So the commentaries ask, what on earth does that mean? It uses the term bracha and bracha. Baracha, whoever blesses you. Mevarechecha, it's the same root word. I will bless. He says, Mekalelcha, whoever curses you, it should say, Kilel shall be cursed. What's A'ar? So A'ar means I will enlighten. Or from the word term that Avram, they may curse you because they don't understand you. But if you remain completely consistent, you will be enlightened. Not you, they will be enlightened. They'll take a look at you and they say, look, this is not a fad, this is not a phase, this is not this is not just it's the 60s playing out, but rather they'll be enlightened that this is something that will show them, give them will show them light, give them clarity. And he says, and all the families of the world shall be blessed by you, even those that cursed you. Even those that cursed you secretly admire you. Or they'll be enlightened and they'll bless. So it says Abraham left and he took Lot. Lot was his nephew, was his brother's kid. He took Lot with him and they went on a journey. And they came to the land of Canaan, and Abraham crossed the river. He came to Shechem, he came to Nablus, right? And the Torah tells us, HaKanani az ba'aret, the Canaanites were in the land. It's important due to history to know what that means. You know, there's when Moshe was supposed to take the Jews into Israel, and Joshua take the Jews into Israel, which was called the land of Canaan. And there was a command, kick out the Canaanites, kick them out. And all the other things that all the other tribes that are under the Canaanites. But Canaani, kick them out. Why? So the commentaries explain where it says Canaani oz ba'aretz, the Canaanites were then in the land, is the land until the Canaanites conquered it belonged to Shem, Noach's son, that's where the Israelites came from, right? We can trace our lineage, and it's in this book after the end of Noah. We can trace our lineage to Shem, right? The Anglo-Saxons, Europeans can trace their Greece and Ashkenaz, France and Germany and etc. Can trace them to Yafes, and the African countries can trace the Chum. So Shem actually owned the land. The Canaanites waged war and kicked Shem out. This is a tale as old as time. So when the Jews, the Hebrews, Israelites, all they did was take it back from Canaan after a few hundred years, right? They a few hundred years later, right? 400 years later, 400 and whatever, 40 years later, 50 years later, they actually fought the land and won it back, right? So it tells us Canaani Ozvaret, the Canaani at that time was in the land. It wasn't their land. They weren't indigenous to the land. They had waged war and conquered it. So now we just conquered it back. Ted, you hear me okay? Okay, good. And God told Abram right then, this land I'm going to give to you. Right? So it's right. This is the land I'm going to give to you, and Abram was happy. Now, that was a test. Clearly, Abram was tested. You have to leave your father's home. But Abram got his next test. As he got into Israel, he got into Nablus, he got into Shechem, which is nowadays a pretty rough part of Israel. It's part of Judea and Samaria. I don't know if it's Judea or Samaria. I think it's the lower part, right? Samaria, I think no, Judea, and then Samaria is above it. So he gets to Shechem, and there was a famine, and he had to leave the land. He had no choice. There was nothing to eat. He was starved. So he went down south. He traveled to Egypt, right? From Nablus to Egypt is 150 miles, something like that, right? 200 kilometers, something like that. So he traveled, and then as they're about to cross over into Egypt, he looked at his wife and saw she was beautiful. He looked at her as others would look at her, and he says, Imri noach chesiyat. Please tell them you are my sister. Because if you tell them you're married to me, they're going to kill me. And I'll be able to remain alive because of you. So never let on that we're married. So they crossed, and right away they grabbed her. And I said, who are you? He goes, I'm his sister. So they took and said, she's so beautiful and such grace, etc. They took her to the house of Paro, and Paro gave Paro. He was this is the Torah tells us that that Paro gave Abraham. Abraham became a wealthy man because of this encounter. He took Sarah, and he made Abraham very, very rich. Remember, Abraham, when he left his father's home, he did not. He was a poor man. He left he left a mansion, right? He left Alpine, New Jersey, and he ended up settling in, and I don't know, North Babylon. I don't know, right? And but here we see that God is in charge. So he left and poverty stricken, but yet through this encounter, this interesting encounter, all of a sudden he became extremely, extremely wealthy. So Pharaoh takes Sarah, and then Pharaoh tries to have his way with her, and according to Rashi, that he was impotent, and everybody else in the palace became impotent, and then Pharaoh realized that this is not the way. Something's off, and he goes over to Abram, and he goes, "What's going on?" And she goes, "She's really my wife," and he says, "Why don't you tell me you're a lie and get out?" Right? He sent him out. He says that this is only going to bring trouble for us, because he says Kamat, nearly one of the people slept with her, referring to himself, right? And he sent him out. The next verse is Avram became very, very well. Sorry? He kept, yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. He kept what Pharaoh gave to him, right? Because other times Avram didn't keep what Pharaoh gave to him. We'll learn later, we can talk about it now, is that after he won a war against the four kings, so the king of Sodom gave him a gift, and he goes, "No, I'm not taking your gift. I'm not taking your gift." Right? He says, "I don't want you to say that I made Avram rich." But here he took this gift. He took this gift. So why would he take one gift and not another gift? So I haven't seen, to be honest, I haven't seen an answer. But if I think about it, here Avram took a gift from Egypt, and he went right back to Israel. Right? With Sodom, he hung around there. So it would say, "Oh, look, Sodom, look, the king of Sodom treats him really right. The king of Sodom sustains him." So because he was living in Elone Mamre, which is not too far from Sodom, he felt that Sodom would take credit, and he didn't want that. With Pharaoh, they're 200, 300 kilometers apart. So he felt that because he was transient, he was able to take the money. So that's one reason I've thought of another reason. Maybe we'll talk about it when we get there. So Abraham ascended. We know that Israel is topographically higher than geographically. Topographically, it's higher than Egypt. It's actually on a higher, right, where he went. Sodom is not, as we know, that the Dead Sea, which is where Sodom was, right, is very, very low. You were descending to below sea level by, I don't know, 2,000 feet or something, like really. But Yerushalayim, the contrast in an hour's ride, right, is you have to go to a very high part. Jerusalem is on a mountain. The whole Jerusalem is on a mountain, and Sodom is below sea level. Right? So it says that he ascended. So he ascended, and what did he do? By Yelech Lamasov, he continued journeying until he reached the place where he encamped originally. So he encamped. There was a famine. He had to leave. He came back. He went to exactly the same place. The Rebbe talks about it. The Rebbe talks about upward mobility. That many people, they live in Brooklyn, they live in Queens, they make a little money, right? And then they move to the suburbs. Right? And then when they move to the suburbs, certain things that there's no kosher this and no kosher that. It's harder for them, etc. But they feel that they don't want to stay in Queens, they don't want to stay in Brooklyn, they want a nice house and this and that, the other. The Rebbe says we learn from Abraham that he didn't stray, he didn't go away from from Brooklyn, from Borough Park, and he went right back to it with all his money, with all his guilt. That's one commentary. That's the Rebbe. Another commentary is that when he was preaching godliness, as he was traveling from Haran to Canaan, and he got to Canaan, and people were telling him the same thing. It seems like you have the God of poverty, right? You're a schlepper. Look at your sandals. Look at your clothing, right? So he went back to the same place, and he said, "Oh yeah, Hashem takes good care of him." So that's another commentary. And then him and Lot, they went their separate ways because they both had a lot of cattle at this stage, and the earth could not, it was too much cattle, so they separated. And Avram said, "Wherever you go, you choose first." So Lot looked, and he said, "I'm going to take the luscious land," and he encamped right by Sodom, which is a mistake, because if you camp near Sodom, you're going to be brought in the Sodom practices, and eventually he moved to Sodom. And we know that Sodom is not the nicest place on earth. We'll learn that in next week's Parshat, right? There's a reason why sodomy comes from the word Sodom, right? There was I guess, I don't know if they invented it or I don't know. I just don't know. I think sodomy used to be illegal, right? I think it used to be illegal anyway. And the Torah tells us that the people of Sodom, even here, people of Sodom were very evil people. They were just evil, and they were terrible people. Now we go into the fight with the 5 kings versus the 4 kings. So the 5 kings, the first king, it says, was Amraphel. The commentaries all agree that Amraphel was Nimrod. Nimrod was the first one that rebelled against God. Nimrod was the person that was the king back in back in the day, and he lived through Isaac's life and he lived through Jacob's life. He was a thorn in the side of God. If you look at Rambam talks about him, is that he was the one that did the Tower of Babel. Right? He was the one who created this big tower to say, let us fight God, etc. So Amraphel was Amraphel. He causes nations to fall. Right? So these 5 kings had somewhere in that back office, maybe in the closet, in the inner office, not my office, the other one. So Amraphel was, and the 5 kings waged war with the 4 kings. Sodom. I'm sorry, Amraphel was the 4 kings waged war with the 5 kings, and Sodom and Birsha, and so the king of Sodom, the king of Amorah, right? And Lot was caught. Lot was caught. Here's the problem: Nimrod and Avram were arch enemies. Nimrod preached anarchy. Nimrod preached Amraphel lives matter, right? And Avram preached all lives matter, right? God lives matter. And it was so they were basically arch enemies. When he caught Sodom and Amorah, when he waged war, and he captured Sodom, he also captured Lot. And Abraham knew that the minute Nimrod finds out that Lot is his nephew, he's done. So Abraham went to war because Nimrod hated Abraham. Abraham upstaged Nimrod many times. So here, this is Abraham's nephew, his brother's kid. Nimrod killed Lot's father, right? According to the Midrash. So he has an opportunity to hurt. He threw him in the furnace. Correct. So the Midrash says that he grabbed hold of Abraham and threw him in a furnace because he was preaching monotheism, and that he was saying Nimrod is not a god. Nimrod is just a human being that behaves like a god. Like the Spartans, right? That guy acted like a god. So the Nimrod was the same idea, and then he grabbed hold of Haran, and Haran said, I believe in God also, because look what happened to Avram. He threw him in the fire and Haran died. Terrible death. He said if he's going to get hold of Lot, he's going to kill him. And he's going to make a spectacle out of him just to try and hurt me. So he got involved in the war. He got involved in the war, and the Torah tells us he took 318 men with him. The Medrash tells us that he didn't take 318 men with him, that he took his servant Elazar. Elazar's name has the numerical value of 318. That's the Medrash. Anyway, so he went to war, and together with the populace, behind him, he went to war, and he was able to beat back these 4 kings and reinstate the 5 kings. The Torah tells us that there were tar pits, right? That they fell into the tar pits and they got stuck. If you've been to LA, Los Angeles, you've been to the La Brea tar pits. You ever been? So it's an amazing thing. It's called La Brea tar pits. It's on La Brea, right? It's in the heart of LA, right? There's an area that's they have a museum also, but they have tar pits. It's sticky tar that comes from the ground. It's black tar, and you step on it and you go, right? So it's just there. It produces its own tar. It's the wildest thing. So here it was also natural tar pits. So when I saw it, you can understand how you fall into a tar pit and it's big enough, you slow you down. The Medrash tells us, by the way, that Avram used, he had God on his side, and the weaponry that he used was very advanced compared to what they had, and the earth turned into different types of weapons, and I don't know, it's just the Medrash stuff. But then I know he won the war. the king of Sodom came over to him and said, and he won the war and he grabbed all the spoils, and the king of Sodom says, take all the spoils, take all the wealth, just leave me the people. So Abraham said, no. He says, I'm not going to take a string, a shoelace, a shoe strap, right? A thread to a shoe strap. I'm not even going to take from you, right? So, by the way, Avram won the war. It was Avram's anyway. So now he's saying, you can take it. I said, well, who are you to? It's my stuff anyway. But no, I don't want you to say that I, wicked Sodom, who I'm going to live nearby, caused me to become wealthy. The commentaries say that because he says, I'm not going to take a thread to a shoe strap, Avram and his progeny were given the mitzvah of tzitzis and tefillin. Right? Tzitzis being the thread and tefillin being the shoe strap, the leather. That because he would not take from the wicked king of Sodom, and we know he was wicked, because in next week's Parshat, therefore he was rewarded with the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis, right? And the mitzvah of tefillin. What comes first? Thread, then shoe strap. We put on our talis before we put on, and this is all based on this, right? We put on our talis first, and then we put on our tefillin. So that's I find that very interesting. Yeah, because I'm not gonna right. I don't want you to ever say that it was me. I caused Avram's greatness. I wanted to say that God caused my greatness. Right? We live too close to each other. Every time people laud me, they say I made him. Right? I was his agent. Right? I made him. He was nothing without me. Avram said, I'm not interested in that relationship. Then Avram had a dream. In a dream, it's interesting. The only one that was fully conscious when God spoke to him was Moshe. It says, panim upon him. Moshe spoke to God face to face. Everyone else was not fully conscious. Different levels of consciousness. So here it was a machzeh and a vision, right? It wasn't fully alert. So it wasn't necessarily a dream, but machzeh, he had a vision. The vision is not necessarily panim upon him, right? You daydream and you have a vision, So he had some type of a vision, and God said, Avram, I'm going to protect you, and you're going to have a tremendous reward. So Avram right away said, I don't care about rewards. I don't have a kid. And Eliezer is going to inherit me. So you can give me all the money in the world. If I don't have a kid, Eliezer is going to be the one that inherits all my wealth. Right? So at that point in time, right then and there, God told him that you will have a natural child. And he took him outside. He took him to the stars, and he says, "Look at the stars. You are you have children like the stars." So the commentaries discuss what does it mean like the stars. So first of all, a star, right? A star gives off every star gives off a little bit of light. So every one of Avram's children give off light. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but they all give off light. Secondly, a star may look like to have a very small part in the dynamic of creation, but however, each star on its own is huge. Right? Each star is going to be multiple times the size of this world. And so too with Avram's children, that people may feel, or the person may feel that, what am I? I'm just, a cog in the wheel. So they explain, no. You're not a cog in the wheel. You're a huge entity. The Rebbe used to say it, by the way. The Rebbe had a line. The Rebbe said, on a birthday, the reason why on a birthday a person should bless people, And the reason why their mazel, their fortune, is at its peak is because it was on this day, however many years ago, God decided that the world needs you. He says that's a birthday. Not that you were just born, it was 9 months after conception, that too. But it's on this day, God decided that the world cannot survive without your presence. And that's the anniversary of this day. Right? So therefore, that's why on a birthday, person should reflect and say, am I living up to my am I living up to my charter? Am I living up to my mission? So so he said, so God to command says like the stars. Like the stars that they have a lot to do, they mean a lot, they do a lot. I believe, I'm not exactly sure what the stars do for creation, but I'm sure they do. Right? The moon is yeah. I know the moon is the gravitational pull, and others. I don't know what the stars exactly, but they. It's definitely required. I'm just saying I don't know what they contribute. We know what a human being contributes. Each person, right? God didn't create anybody redundant, right? So there's millions of stars and there's millions of people. Everybody was created for a reason. Nobody, nobody's just a doppelganger, so they can be somebody's double. They're created for a reason. And then God told them, and Abram, right? Abram didn't ask for a sign. God told him. Then God told them, I'm going to give you this land. So Abram said, give me a sign. Right? Which is interesting. For the child, he didn't ask him for a sign, but God gave him the star sign. But he says, so Hashem said, okay, we're going to do the bris ben absarim. We're going to do the covenant between the pieces. He says, I want you to take these 3 animals. I want you to cut them in half. Each one symbolizes a future sacrifice on the altar. And I want you to walk in between. So Abram walked in between. This was a very common bond people made then. So Abram was being timely. God was being timely. In fact, God, it was like that's what they did back then, right? So and he says as he did these sacrifices, right? He says all of a sudden birds of prey came. So Rashi says the birds of prey are the enemies of the Jewish people that sought to pick our bones. He says, however, by Yashev Esav Avram sent them away, and they went away. So that's also a prophecy that the vultures, those that want our demise, and those that want to eat at our carcasses, will not be successful. Ultimately, will not be successful. So these are very deep metaphors, etc. Anyway, darkness came, and God told Abram that you're going to be your people are going to be a strange nation in a strange land, and they're going to oppress them, but I am going to punish those, and you will come out a great people. It's interesting to know Abram didn't argue. Abram said, no, I don't want it. I don't want the great people. I don't want the oppressing. Abram didn't say anything. This was just this is God telling him. And God said they're going to be in a strange land, and they're going to be oppressed. God tell them what's going to happen, and then I'm going to punish the nation that did it. So if this is a foregone conclusion, why would God punish? All the Egyptians did was they did what God wanted. They're going to be an alien nation, and they're going to oppress them. This is all kind of biblical stuff. They were following God's command. So the answer the Talmud gives is that it didn't have to be the Egyptians. Yes, it was decreed that the Jewish people should suffer, But harbe shluchim lamakom. God has many emissaries. It could have been, the Canaanites. It could have been this. It could have been that. It could be the Yevusi, the Gashi, right? It could have been the Amaleki. It could have been the Midian. It could have been, right? The fact that it could have been Cush. It could have been Yavan. It could have been, there was already taught there was 70 nations. It could have been anybody. Mitzrayim, Egypt was one said, we'll do it. That's why they were punished. So even if something is destined to happen, right? It's negative is to happen. Who the messenger. So it's not shooting the messenger, because you don't have to be the messenger to do something bad. Egypt chose for economical reasons, by the way, right? It was really debased. Egypt chose ultimately. They didn't want to lose this. They wanted to build up their economy, and they wanted to set slavery where you don't have to pay and get work done, and it was just and that way they'll oppress the Jews, etc. So Egypt came up with their harshness. Egypt came up with they're going to be the country. They'll be the nation to do it. So that's why they were beaten. And God said, I will smite them. Right. So I will smite them, etc., and I will beat them. So they were punished. They were punished because they chose. Now, Sarai, Avram's wife. Sarai means princess. Rashi tells us, quotes from the Gemara, from the Talmud, that Sarai was the daughter of Pharaoh. When Avram went to Pharaoh, went to Egypt to get food, and Pharaoh nearly had his way with Sarai, etc. He realized there's something very special here. So he said to his daughter, "You want to see real nobility? Go travel with them, and it would be a great, didn't mean it forever necessarily, but go travel with them and you'll learn a lot." Right? He was enamored with Abraham. So Sarah, that's who they say was. So Sarah, not Sarah, Hagar. Hagar was. So Sarah means princess. Hagar was also a princess. That was Pharaoh's daughter. So Sarah couldn't have kids. So she turned to Abraham and says, "You know what? We got to have a kid. We got to have something. So why don't you marry, have her as a wife?" 10 years, right? Right. And that's the halacha, by the way. If you can't have children, you should wait 10 years before you decide to get divorced. Uncover every stone, uncover, right? But so even though there are people who waited longer than 10 years and have had it, right? There's a family in Brooklyn, the Marazov family. They had a child after 19 years. They had twins. But every other thing they tried, they just didn't work. But they stayed together, and they had the Rebbe stayed with the Rebbetzin for how many years? 50 years, whatever it was. So she said, "I can't have a kid. But we need something. We need something. So take Hagar." And Abram took Hagar, and from the very first conjugal visit, she became pregnant. The minute she became pregnant, she said to Sarah, "I'm better than you, and I am no longer your maidservant." So Sarah said, "Of course you're my maidservant." So she said, "No, Avram freed me." That's why Sarah was angry at Avram, because there's a halacha, and this halacha applies today, and which is no big deal. The fact that it applied 3,000 years ago is amazing. The halacha is, if a woman owns property, or if a woman, and the property, by the way, it could be land, it could be sheep, it could be slaves, servants, If the woman owns it, while their husband and wife are married, the husband is allowed to take the, take the cotton from the field, take the apples from the tree that the woman owns, but the land still belongs to the woman. And if there's a divorce, the woman retains the land. Only when they're married, the husband can shear the wool off the sheep, can milk the cow, could this and that and the other. And likewise, while they're married, he can use the maid servants, the manservants. So she said, but you have no right to free. And so what's amazing is that 3,000 years ago, a woman was allowed to own property. In the eyes of Judaism, and it's I don't know when women could own property in the United States. I don't know. They couldn't vote till the suffrage movement, but here they could own land. So I just find that amazing. Anyway, so she became pregnant, and so Avram said, "Okay, it's yours. I'm not freeing her. It's yours." Sarah let her have it, and Hagar ran away for the first time. When Hagar ran away, she met an angel, and she said to the angel said, well, "Why are you running away?" She says, "Because my mistress, she's Sarah Gevirti, Sarah, my mistress is I'm running away." So the Malach, the angel, told her that you should go back, and behold, Hinachara, behold, you will become pregnant. Now, she was pregnant. She was pregnant when she left. The angel told her, "You will become pregnant." So Rashi says that she miscarried. She miscarried her first one, and she ran away because she felt it was the stress that caused her to miscarry. And the angel said, "You go back, and you will get pregnant again, and you shall name him Ishmael. God has heard. Ishmael, God has heard." And then the angel told her that he's going to be a para Adam. He's going to be a wild ass of a man. His hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. All right, it's going to be. If you look at Onkelos, he translated the Torah in Aramaic. He wrote it a little clearer. Now, Onkelos lived in Roman times, when in the year 60 CE, right, something like that. In Roman times he lived. Onkelos translate. He was a nephew of the Caesar, and he said, everybody huye tzarich l'chayla, which is different than how Rashi translated. He is going to need people. And people, the rest of the world, are going to need him. There's going to be a need. There's going to be something that he has that the world needs. That's how he translates Yodeh Bakel. Rashi says he's going to be fighting. He'll be He'll be a fighter, and there's going to be many arguments, and it's Western civilization versus this civilization. This they're both right, but Onkelos says he's going to have something that we need. Now, one thing that we need, and he's going to need us for everything else. So Onkelos, that was thousands of years ago. He said he's going to have something. He's going to have something that we need, right? If cars ran on water, there'd be less wars. You came back. So Hagar, oil is off. For whatever reason, he was blessed with oil.
He also gave them Torah.
They gave him a code. Gave him a code, but they gave everybody. Everybody was given. Noah was given a code, right? Everybody. Islam took it a little more serious with the one God. really they're monotheists. Even to today, they're monotheists. They don't, right? If anything, was a prophet, not a god, right? There's only one God, and everybody else is prophets. Nobody's a god. And she had a son, and the Torah tells us that Abraham called him Yishmael, not Hagar. So Rashi says it was a prophecy. Then he had a prophecy that Yishmael should call him Yishmael. But also we learned something from here. A halacha is if a husband and wife give birth to a kid, and there's no chiyuv, there's no like you didn't just lose a parent, or didn't, and all things being equal, then the husband has the right for the first name. Right? That's the halacha. If the wife has a need because she just lost somebody, a father, an uncle, this, that, whatever it may be, an aunt, or whatever, then that's something else. But if all things being equal, what happens if they both have lost a parent, right? So then they once again the father comes first. So Avram called him Yishmael. Avram, the Torah tells us, was 86 years old when Hagar bore a son. Then the Torah tells us that your name should no longer be Avram, but rather it should be Avraham. And we get the idea that changing a name brings different fortune. Right? When the most common time we change a name, but it's not the only time. The most common time we change a name is if somebody's very sick. Because right after you change the name, right? I mean, it's hard to know right after when, but when he changed the name from Avram to Avraham and Sarai to Sarah, they had a child. Definitely Sarai to Sarah was was pretty close. Avram, it's hard to know the juxtaposition exactly when. But so when somebody's very sick, we don't change the name, we add a name. Right? You don't say your name is no longer Moshe. Your name is Chaim Moshe. You add a name when somebody's very sick. But also people change names when they feel that they can't get ahead. It's just whatever they do, it's like the opposite of the Midas touch. And whatever they just have no mazel. They can't stay married. They can't have kids. They can't have this. They can't have that. Right? It's just a mazel. So they add a name. Right? I know somebody whose his name was Don. Don means justice, and he felt very justicey. Right? He felt that he wasn't. There was no compassion in his life. Everything he did was. So he added a name, Nachum. Nachum means console, comfort. It's softer. So it was Nachum Don. Right? Nachum Don. So it kind of it softened up the Don part. Right? So it became Nachum Don because he felt that it was too much Don, too much din, too much severity, too much justice. And another time you add a name is if you have the same name as your in-law. You're the same sex, and you get engaged to a girl, and let's say your name is Yaakov, and the girl's father is Yaakov. So you add a name. It could be the father-in-law that adds a name, or the son-in-law, the mother-in-law, or the daughter-in-law. So my sister, for example, she married a guy, Yossi. Yossi's mother was Rivka. My sister was Rivka. And so when they got married, she added a name, Bracha Rivka. Right? So she added a name. I have a classmate who was Menachem Mendel, and his daughter married a Menachem Mendel. And he says, chances are all my daughters are going to marry Menachem Mendel. So instead of them changing the name, I'm just going to add my name, Yosef Mendel. Yosef Menachem Mendel. So he says, so that way my sons-in-law won't have to all change their name. Right? So that's what he did. So that's a very, very common practice. Very, very common practice. If a person's sick, if a person's just down and can't seem to get ahead, that's less common. But it is it is viable. So Hashem told him, Abraham, you are going to be named Abraham because you're going to be Av Hamon Goyim. You're going to be the father of many nations. Right? And he says, and kings are going to come from you, and you will have a child. And in order to have a child, you're going to have to keep a covenant with me, and you're going to have to get a circumcision. So the Torah tells us it's not really a circumcision; it's a bris, and the bris has to be on the 8th day, unless you acquire somebody older, you adopt a kid that's older than eight days, then you do it right away. But the bris has to be done on the 8th day, and the Torah tells us the orel zacha, and the orel, the foreskin of the male. That's how we know where we're really to circumcise, because this is called an orel as well. The earlobe is called an orel. Imagine we just had to do the earlobe, right? Or the aortic valve is called an orel. So when the Torah adds the word orel zacha, it's the thing that distinguishes between a male and a female. And you have to have a bris, and anybody that doesn't have a bris, the nichosal, that should be cut off. So this is the way it works. If a parent refuses to give their child a bris, they're not cut off. They've committed a sin. The cutoff goes on the individual. So if the parents refuse to give a bris, then the beth then have to intervene and give the child a bris. Obviously, these days, if you give a child a bris without the parents' consent, you're going to go to prison for a very long time. So there's nothing here that the parents can do. And also, I think in Israel, with the secular courts, I don't think they could push it either. And it's when the child becomes of age, the onus is on that child who's now a quasi-adult or an adult to get that bris. So I tell parents when they say they don't want to give their child a bris, let him choose. I said, you're making a huge mistake, because now he's going to suffer. He's going to suffer. When he's 20, 22, 24, 30, in marriage, Jewish girl, he's going to have to get it done, 36. I thought, why do this? So I said, well, we're not doing it. And there's a movement. There's a movement not to give the kid a bris, but it's a mistake. I haven't met yet any newborn that remembers what they went through after, and it's also much harder when it's an adult to give a bris, right? There's stitches, otherwise there's no stitches. In a baby, there's no stitches. You do a bandage and you put a little bit of, you stop the blood with what's called that powder, and then you put cream and you put a bandage, and when the bandage falls off, it's a couple of days later, it's done. Right? You remember it? Remember being a kid though, right? It was queasy, granted, but so he said that's the thing you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to give a bris, and then God said to him that your wife, making it very clear now, that God told Avram, tell this to Sarah. He says your wife will have a child, but she has to change her name from Sarai to Sarah. And Avram fell on his face by Yitzchak, and he laughed. Rashi says it wasn't a laugh of disbelief; it was a laugh of joy. It was raw happiness. And he said, wow, I'm in my 90s, I'm going to have a kid, right? And Avram said, are you sure you don't mean from Ishmael? He goes, no, Ishmael too, but you're going to have to, but from you and Sarah as well. And then the Torah ends that Abraham did it. He gave himself a bris. He was 99 years old. Ishmael at that time was 13 years old. And to Ishmael's credit, he got a bris as well, because he could have easily said, I'm not doing this, right? But he got a bris as well. And that's how the Torah concludes. So a bris and a circumcision are actually a little different. First of all, a bris has to be given by a Jewish person. The non-Jew does the bris, it's not a bris, it's a circumcision. There also has to be a bracha. You also have to take off all the foreskin, not a partial foreskin, right? So if you do a partial foreskin, you're gonna have to rectify that, right? So the entire foreskin has got to go. It can't cover any of the funny word corona, right? The and in addition, underneath the foreskin is the thin membrane that has to be removed as well. In order for it to be a proper bris, the membrane has to be removed. In the hospital, they don't remove that membrane because that membrane basically eventually tears and right. But with a bris, it has to be. You have to have a chaticha and priya. You have to have the cut of the foreskin and the priya, the pull down of the membrane. If you look at a moil has a very sharp, long thumbnail. You look at him up because he actually does the priya with his nail, right? Right, to add an insult to, so that is that is the difference. If a child was circumcised in hospital, then they have to have a bris. They don't cut anything. They just do a pinprick, make a bracha, pinprick, and then that's considered that they've been brought into the covenant. So circumcision, while it's and by that time the child has no membrane, because the membrane just tears by itself. So that makes the circumcision into a bris by doing a pinprick, little pinprick, and then it's done. Any questions? Whoops. Any questions, anybody? Okay, so
I have a thought that